Hello and welcome to Center Ice Cardcast, your one-stop podcast shop for all things hockey cards. My name is Eric Andrews, also known in the hobby as Hammerhawks, and I'm joined by my co-host and fellow hobbyist Aaron Goldstein, better known throughout the hobby as Crease Collector. So just kicking things off tonight, I just wanted to get this out of the way right from the start. I wanted to give a big shout out to Chris Hurt on Twitter. He was very generous and sent me a handful of cards for my 2019-20 Upper Deck Stature set that I still needed. So Chris, thank you so much for doing that. I really do appreciate it. Just your willingness to help me out without expecting anything in return. That's part of what makes this hobby so great is people like Chris that say, hey, I have something that someone else can use and will enjoy more than I do and that I will. So I'm just going to pass it along and let them enjoy it. So yeah, I just wanted to give Chris a big shout out to say thank you for his random act of kindness package that I got earlier this week. And yeah, thanks, Chris.
It's always cool hearing about that stuff. That's definitely a really kind and generous thing to do. Good on you, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Now the main portion of this episode, the big news in hockey, but also in the hobby right now, is the New York Rangers just won first overall pick in the NHL Draft. For those who don't know, Phase 2 of this interesting draft lottery was conducted on August 10th to finally determine the team claiming the first overall pick. And it was won by the placeholder team during Phase 1 in July. And it was randomized. This final pick was randomized between the 8 remaining teams that lost in the play-in round of this kind of weird pandemic postseason. Just the same thing as always, each team had the one lottery ball, and they were entered into the draw. And the New York Rangers, like I said, were lucky winners and now have the privilege of drafting Rimouski, Oceanic, star left winger Alexis Lafreniere with the first pick. And just pretty big news. I mean, considering all the teams involved in that Phase 2 draft lottery, seeing the Rangers come out of it, they weren't my first choice personally. Like I would have liked to see, as much as I am a homer with the Leafs, I would have loved to see Montreal actually take home that pick just because obviously he's from Quebec and having that Montreal sweater, that iconic logo on his chest when he starts playing would be awesome for the franchise, first overall pick and be great for the hobby. But I mean, hey, the New York Rangers, is a good young team with definitely some big players there. And it's going to be interesting to see and watch them grow, especially with Lafreniere there now. So, obviously nothing is set in stone just yet. Obviously the draft hasn't happened, but I mean, obviously he is projected to go number 1, and it's almost 100% at this point. So, yeah, there's a lot to kind of unpack here. Eric, what do you think of the Rangers getting the first overall pick? Like, what was your initial reaction?
Yeah, I mean, I would say going into the Phase 2 of the draft lottery, I really was hoping that the Rangers would be the ones to win just because, they provide that huge market, being an iconic Original Six franchise with a really strong fan base in a really large city, obviously. But at the same time, they weren't one of those teams like a Toronto or an Edmonton or Pittsburgh where people would have been upset that, this really loaded team, that just had a bad round in the postseason now gets to pick first overall. Like, that's not fair. I think it's hard for anyone to really be upset about the Rangers winning it. They're very much a rebuilding team, and I mean, they're pretty much there at this point. I mean, they've showed this year, that they're pretty much ready to go, and adding a franchise piece like Lafreniere is, a huge boost for them. And I think is going to be something really exciting, not only, just in the hockey world itself, but also in the hobby. I think it's great that a big market team like the Rangers were able to win that pick as opposed to a smaller market, say like a Florida or a Minnesota or even a Nashville. Not that those aren't good teams, with a future, and obviously Lafreniere would have been a welcome addition to any of those franchises. But I think with him being such a hyped up prospect that should go on to have a really successful career, going to a big market like New York, I think just really will bode well for his hobby value. You look at guys in the past, that maybe haven't gone to teams that have such a large following. Obviously in recent years, you have Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier going to the Devils, and obviously both are skilled players that'll likely have pretty successful careers, but the Devils just don't really pack that same hobby punch that someone like the Rangers do. So I think just looking at it from a hobby standpoint, I think the Rangers were probably one of the more ideal landing spots for him out of the 8 teams that had a chance. Like you said, going into this, but before the postseason even started, I was hoping that it would work out, that he would end up in Montreal, like you said, Aaron. But then obviously the Canadiens had different plans and upset the Penguins in the play-in round. So that just wasn't meant to be. But yeah, I mean, I think it's good that he landed in a big market. And I'm excited to see how the hobby reacts to him being a Ranger. I think definitely that's going to help his value for his cards. Like I said, as opposed to if he was in, somewhere like a Florida or Minnesota, I think being with that big market's going to help his value. And we should see that pretty much right out of the gate. And just to transition a little bit into kind of the next topic, earlier this week, Billy Celio, who obviously is a good friend of the show, having been on a couple times at this point, announced earlier this week that Lafreniere will be available for Upper Deck to use in 2020-2021 Upper Deck Series 1, which obviously, there was a lot of discussion and concern about if that would be possible, just based on how things have unfolded over the last handful of months. And based on when Upper Deck Series 1 releases each year, there's definitely legitimate concern about if Lafreniere would be able to be included, just, based on when the 2021 season got underway. Based on how the rules are, theoretically a player isn't allowed to have a rookie card until he's made his NHL debut in either the regular season or the postseason. So if the season didn't start until, say, December, well, how is Lafreniere going to be in Upper Deck Series 1, which comes out in November? So there are some negotiations that need to be done, but Upper Deck and the NHL and the NHLPA were able to come to terms on some agreements to work out a list of players that would be eligible to be used in Upper Deck's products. Obviously Upper Deck Series 1 is the first product each year that features those new rookies. Obviously, you still have the carryover rookies that debuted in the prior season that are going to have those live rookie cards in the early releases. But as far as the newly drafted or newly playing rookies, those guys aren't in any products up until Upper Deck 1. So that was definitely a very valid concern about whether those bigger name upcoming rookies like Lafreniere would be available for use. And I think it's really good that they're able to work it out that Lafreniere is going to be available for Upper Deck 1. Obviously, at this point, we don't necessarily know precisely how he will be used. Billy's words were just that he will be available to be used in the product. So, I mean,
it's going to be interesting.
Yeah,
It's going to be like, how are they going to use? Like, I know we've seen, as far as the card and what's visually going to look like, we've seen draft photos used in the past. The one that sticks out to me is kind of like those MVP, those short printed draft photos that they use for like the number 1 pick and things like that. So, and those were quite valuable. They were kind of like an oddball card. Not normally seen too much on cards. Obviously, we want photos of them on the ice playing, but those draft cards definitely can sell well and do obviously bring you back to a great moment for that player. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go about this. Are they going to use a photogenic picture of him? At the draft, there's a lot of cameras there usually, and a lot of Upper Deck representatives and stuff like that. They're picturing themselves with the hockey stick. They're inside that little makeshift dressing room and whatnot. It's kind of cheesy, but hey, they do what they got to do. Or are they going to set up some sort of on-ice photo shoot with him in some Rangers gear and try to make it as realistic as possible or something? I'm really not sure. It's going to be really interesting. And another point that I was thinking about this week, if they decide to go with, and I speculate they will go with the draft photo. I mean, I could be totally wrong, but I think that draft photo, however many they take, I think eventually that photo from that time will be used as the official Young Gun photo. But as he gets going along and does debut with the Rangers eventually and does get his canvas Young Gun in Series 2, For me, it's going to be interesting because that would be, an action shot on a card of him in full Rangers gear in Series 2 for his canvas. So I'm just wondering, would that outsell, maybe not long term, but would that action shot, which would be heavily preferred by collectors, outsell his original Young Gun from Series 1 just because of the fact that, aesthetically, it might look a little bit better or a little bit more, familiar for what we're used to when you're talking about cards, especially a rookie card, with a player debuting with their team. So that's going to be very interesting. But again, I think they will use a draft photo. I think they will make it look good. Yeah, I think it'll definitely sell well. I mean, I've seen some prices that, just spitballing prices of like 250 to 300 Canadian right out of the gate. So that's going to be very interesting to see how it's going to sell, especially if he gets off to a hot start. That's going to be very, very fun to see where that thing goes. There's a lot of passionate Rangers collectors. You see them everywhere. But there's also a lot of passionate collectors from Quebec. So there's going to be people competing with each other, left and right. So draft photo or not, believe me, guys, this card is going to sell well, and rightfully so, because he's going to be a very special player. I've heard people compare him to kind of like a Nathan McKinnon. Obviously, his CHL career was fantastic. And although he's not in the Crosby McDavid type, elite level status, he would be kind of, as far as McKinnon goes, kind of knocking at that door. So Lafreniere is getting compared with a guy like McKinnon. That's definitely something to not scoff at. And it's going to be cool to see how he gets going. Another point to make that because of this unique season and the delayed start that the 2021 season is going to have, he's going to have that extra time to prepare, which is going to be unlike, say a McDavid year where he was kind of bouncing around from, his major junior commitments to, the combine, the draft, and then he's right into development camp. He gets going very quickly, but also he doesn't have much of a break. That kind of goes for a lot of these top end draft picks. But Lafreniere's, he's in a different boat. He hasn't played for a while. And so he's kind of just sitting back and waiting to see what happens. And so it's going to be interesting to see how he gets going with his NHL career, especially given the amount of rest he's going to have. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this whole thing plays out, especially his cards go, but also just on the ice and seeing how he gets going.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to add a few points as well. First off, with photos, if we're talking about draft photos being used on cards, and especially if we're talking about the Young Guns, one card that immediately jumps out, in my mind for that would be the Rick Nash Young Gun from 0203. I think is probably the last big time Young Gun that featured a draft photo. There's been some other, big names that have had draft photos. I know in 0304 they did Stahl and Brent Burns were draft photos or just headshot photos. But generally speaking, really ever since then, the big name Young Guns have always featured action shots. So, it'll kind of be an interesting thing, really no matter how they do it, especially if it's an off-ice photo. But another thing to even consider just with that is this isn't even going to be a normal draft. Like it's not going to be done in person. So are there even going to be formal draft photos? I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was kind of wondering that as well. Like, is Upper Deck going to send Lafreniere, a bunch of stuff? And then when he gets drafted to the Rangers, is there going to be, a film crew there, to kind of take some shots? Are they going to, make something up? Like, I'm not sure. Is it going to be kind of like a day with the cup insert where, they're just totally out in their element completely and it just, something like that? I'm not sure. Like, no question, like this card is going to have a lot of demand, but yeah, how it's done is going to be very interesting. But I think also just the whole unique scenario that this whole, pandemic provides. I think that for some people will even, especially if they're like a big Young Guns collector, I think that would drive the price a little bit further, especially like right out of the gate, because people want this unique Young Gun, because you're never going to see a Young Gun like this probably ever again, because just the whole world's standing still right now. It's picking up a little bit, but this whole draft as we know it, it's not going to exist, like you said. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do that. Like, I just don't know. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I mentioned this to you earlier this week, Aaron, but I would almost like to see them kind of just embrace it and say, hey, like this is a really different time, and this is by no means normal. So let's take that and run with it and do something way out of the ordinary that we would normally never do. For me, something I think of, if you're talking New York City and things like that, maybe you get them to put on a blue Rangers jersey and take them out to the Statue of Liberty or something.
That would be really cool. Like, definitely harness just New York, like in a card in some way, shape, or form. Like, I was going to say, like, do you think he wears a mask? I don't think so, but do you think he wears one?
I don't know. I guess we'll see.
There was a card. It's not hockey, but I believe the first female coach in the MLB. I believe she's a third base coach. I'm not too familiar with baseball, so I don't know her name, but I saw her first card. I guess it was the first card that featured a female coach in Major League Baseball. And she was actually, because, I guess the base coaches have to have masks on, I guess. And so she was actually featured like on her rookie card, I guess you could say, like wearing a mask, like on her card, which was really kind of cool, especially in the times we're in right now. Some people thought that was kind of weird, but I think it just speaks to the time we're living in now. So like, I could definitely see people putting extra meaning like into a card like that if he is wearing a mask. For a special card like this for the young gun, I don't think he will. But yeah, just some food for thought for sure. And I think Upper Deck, I'm hoping they'll definitely make the most of it and say, Eric, like you said, okay, maybe we're not going to do action shots. Okay, that's fine. Maybe we can't even do our traditional draft photos. So let's just have some fun with it. And let's make the best off-ice card we can. Like, I'm hoping they get creative with it and do a couple mock-ups, maybe, like definitely do a couple photo shoots, and definitely think about what kind of image they want on this card. Because it's definitely going to be interesting, but I could definitely see it coming under a lot of scrutiny for some collectors. Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I would almost kind of like to see them, with that theme of just embracing it and going for it. I kind of almost like to see them take the mindset of, hey, in this case, let's have the normal Young Gun have kind of like that Upper Deck canvas style of unique photo. And then on the canvas card, have that, iconic action photo. So kind of like switching them. A lot of times on the canvas cards, you'll see, whether it be, during a pregame warm up or,
Yeah, some guys playing soccer or something, or
yeah,
sharpening skates, something like that. Yeah.
something different. I mean, I know there's like an Upper Deck canvas card of Johnny Gaudreau holding puppies or something, like just
Oh,
something
yeah.
something really different and unique. I mean, I'm not saying that they should take a picture of Lafreniere holding puppies, but something interesting like that, just really embracing it and say, hey, this is going to be different no matter how we do it. So let's just make it different. Let's take this opportunity to do something different and something cool, something memorable. Maybe people like it, maybe people don't, but eventually we're going to have the Young Gun canvas card and we can put a really nice action photo on that. And maybe people end up liking the canvas card more, maybe they like the obscurity of the normal Young Gun more. Who knows? I don't know that there's necessarily a wrong way of doing it. I mean, I would say I would be a little bit disappointed if it ends up being just kind of that like canned on ice rookie photo shoot type of photo where they're just like clearly in a practice rink and
Right.
nothing's going on and it's just like obvious that it's a staged practice photo. I would even say it might be interesting if you take him to Madison Square Garden and at least have the environment be right. If you want an on ice photo, maybe have it be him wearing Rangers gear and have it be taken with the goal cam looking up at the Madison Square Garden roof or something like that.
Yeah, it's gonna be quite interesting, but I think they'll make it right. Like, back to what we were saying before about kind of harnessing New York. Those Fanimation cards, they're kind of cartoonish, but those kind of bring out kind of the city that these guys are playing with. I haven't looked at them all, but again, they're cartoonish, and so they can bring a lot more to the table with it being kind of art based. But they really bring out the true colors of not only the player but just the team. And so I think if the card's going to be off ice, again, if they can harness the city and and really bring in not only Rangers fans but bring in just New Yorkers into it, like not on the card, but just bring in that New York feel. Like, I think you can definitely see a lot of obviously Rangers collectors going for this card, but just a lot of New Yorkers like being pulled into this kind of card market that is obviously off the chain right now, and seeing your guy representing your city on a big Young Gun card in this crazy pandemic year. I think that's going to be, if done right, I think it can be very well done, and I think definitely have a lot of collectability now and in the future as well, long term. So it's going to be really cool to see how they do it. I think they'll do a good job. I really do think that since March, since the world shut down, I think they can kind of hopefully see this coming, that, you know, the NHL might get canceled, or, you know, next season, like it's going to be, most likely it's going to be postponed till December, they're saying. So it gives Upper Deck a lot of time to kind of prepare for this, and hopefully bring some good ideas to the table. So, you know, I think they'll do a really good job.
Yeah, I expect they will as well. And one other thing, kind of like we've been talking about, you know, the different kinds of photos that they can use. I'm curious to see if that kind of affects the value of the card too. Like
Yeah.
to me, if you got something cool, you know, and it's just like a fun card, not that like it's, you know, you make it into a joke, obviously not. But
No.
if you do something more unique and that kind of becomes like an iconic card, I can see that really improving the value. Whereas if you did something, you know,
Like staged?
staged, or, you know, like a practice kind of photo, like the rookie photo shoot kind of thing, I could see that almost hurting the value too, just because.
I think it could go both ways. Like, I definitely see what you're saying. I think if it's done well, like, I think it will increase it, like, at least temporarily increase the value of the card, especially people in New York, you know, kind of getting in on it. But, you know, as far as the off ice versus on ice thing, I think, you know, if they come out with an off ice card, I think people are going to complain and not like it because they wanted an on ice card. And if you do an on ice card and it doesn't turn out so well, I think people are just going to say, hey, well, you should have just done, you know, an off ice card and make it cool. So I think it could go both ways. I think, unfortunately, because of the uniqueness of this year, I think for Upper Deck, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. So yeah, like, I think if they do it, you know, a nice off ice, I think it could increase the value of the card. But if they do an on ice photo and it doesn't come out too well, I don't think it'll hurt it too much, but we'll see.
Yeah, I would say I probably would prefer to see something off ice. I think that's probably just a little bit safer of a bet, just purely talking about the actual image itself. You know, if it's going to be on ice, I would really want to see it done in a way that, like, you don't know that it's kind of like a stage photo or something like that. You know, like I
I think
said,
they could do that. You know, if he does, you know, he gets full Rangers gear, and, you know, they put him through some drills and he's just skating around with the puck. I think they can capture a couple images that really look like he's in a game. I don't think that'll be a problem, depending on the photo shoot length, because they'll be really into it. You know, it's not like one of those rookie photo shoot things, you know, at those rookie camps. Like, it's a real environment where they need a good shot. So I think they can get it if they really want to. But I really think they're going to go off ice with this. I think it'll really capture, in a good way, I think it'll capture the uniqueness of that year, especially going forward, assuming that we do have the traditional Young Gun photo moving forward, especially with the first overall pick. You know, I think going off ice is definitely the way to go, just again, to harness the whole uniqueness of this year, and to really, you know, when someone who's maybe new to the hobby or maybe a veteran in the hobby, they see this first overall pick Young Guns card and they know it's something different, you know, just him not being in gear. And I think that, you know, I think that's a big plus at the end of the day. You know, it's not going to please everybody. Like, this is a very unique year, especially with the rookie card class and the eligible players from this playoff bubble. A couple of the names that will be left off or will be included. You know, it's not going to please everyone. It's not going to be a perfect year when it comes to hockey cards. It never is, but I think they're going to do the best they can. I mean, they negotiated with the NHLPA to really get his rights, assuming once he's drafted, because like I said, we said earlier, a player can't be used on a card until they step foot on the ice in the NHL. So this is obviously a very difficult year. So assuming they made a negotiation for Lafreniere only, they really pushed hard for it. And I think knowing that, hey, okay, we got these rights, that's a great thing. Him alone will sell Upper Deck Series 1, like, let's get real. And so I think they're going to do something good with it. I think they have to.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just circling back on the conversation we had a little while earlier about the value of the card. Like I said, I do think some of that will come down to, just how the card looks. Obviously, a hardcore Rangers collector or a hardcore Young Guns collector is going to buy the card either way. But if you're kind of more either a casual collector, or if you're a collector who, a card like that, you might take it or leave it just based on how it looks. I'm that way sometimes. If I think a card looks cool, I might say, yeah, I want to go get that card. I would even put myself in that boat for this card. I would say if it comes out looking really cool, I'll probably try and grab one if I think that it's a worthwhile purchase or acquisition. But obviously, we've seen some discussion online about what people are thinking the value might be once that card is released. I would probably guess that at absolute worst, we're looking at probably about 150 US, which is around 200 Canadian. I think that's like the absolute bare bone, like floor for that card. Realistically, I could definitely see it going more toward that 200 US range. And again, we're talking like right out of the gate, release day, the first week or so after. Eventually, you might see it drop off. But, just looking at the release price, I really think that a card like this should command probably, in that 200 US range out of the gate. I've seen guesses a lot higher. I've seen people that think for varying reasons that, he's either not, as strong of a player as people think, or depending on how the card is done, that it might just not have that value. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting conversation, and we've seen some lively conversation just in the last week since, all this has kind of unfolded. Aaron, what are you thinking as far as a release day value for the Lafreniere Young Gun?
Again, we've seen a lot of values floating around. I think 150 is very fair, just because, obviously there's a lot of passionate Rangers collectors out there that no matter what will want the card. So I think that will pump up the card to at least, a really solid value out of the gate. The card could be blank, with his name on it, and Rangers collectors would need that for their collection. So I think that goes to show you just the pull that fan base has. As far as the hobby goes. So there's definitely a lot of passion collectors there that, yeah, I think 150 as a floor price is pretty fair. I've seen on a high end around 300. So, I mean, who knows? Right out of the gate, I would say, yeah, probably 150, 175. I would say to start. And then from there, who knows? Especially if he gets off to a hot start with the Rangers come December, then who knows at that point, really.
Yeah, and another thing to consider too is just, how much the hobby has been booming over these last few months.
Exactly.
How big of an impact is that going to have on its value? In years past, you've seen that top Young Gun go for pretty good amount right out of the gate, even if it's not so much, a super desirable player. Looking last year, Jack Hughes, his Young Gun has definitely dropped off quite a bit since release. I think it's probably around 50, 60 bucks US right now. But I believe right around release, they were selling up around 100 or 125 US. So, just if you look at that comparison, I think obviously the Lafreniere definitely outsells that. There's no way it doesn't.
Sure.
But then you add in the factor of, people are spending way more on cards right now, and especially
he's on the Rangers.
He's on the Rangers, and it's kind of, indisputably, it's one of those more investment type of cards. People really like collecting Young Guns for their long-term value and growth potential. And, when you factor that in anyway, and you factor in, very hyped up prospect in a big market, and then add in the fact that over these last 5 months or so that people have been going nuts buying, these
100%.
high-end cards, who knows? I mean, I don't know that I'd necessarily see it going to 250 or 300 US right out of the gate, but who knows? I mean, it very well could. It wouldn't surprise me. I wouldn't say that I expect that, but it really wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, exactly. It also depends on depending on what the card looks like, it also depends on how this card is marketed as well. if you get a nice candid shot of him in, say, the Statue of Liberty, and depending on, again, how that is marketed and pushed out to just hockey fans in general and the general public, like that card could be like really worthy of like maybe not going viral, but I mean, it's going to be in a lot of people's heads for sure if that card is pushed like I think it should be, depending on what it looks like and the uniqueness of the whole time right now. So that could also factor into it as well. But yeah, it's going to be very, very cool to see. And we touched on this last episode, but we've already seen his CHL cards from the recent SB Game Use CHL edition product go for a couple hundred. So definitely people are really thinking about this guy on those prospect lists, but also just in the hobby. We're seeing people start to pay crazy money for him. And, if it keeps rolling, we're definitely going to see some big bucks for his young gun, no matter what it looks like.
Yeah, and another thing to consider too, this isn't just some random rookie card, like this is his first NHL card. So it's just, with that going to add even more demand for it, more value. He's had CHL cards for a few years now, but it's always different when that player gets their first NHL cards. It just is. It's an entirely different thing altogether. And the demand for those cards is just so much higher. Obviously they're more plentiful than CHL cards would be, but there's obviously a much larger market for them as well. So yeah, I mean, and that's an interesting note that you made there, Aaron, talking about his CHL card values and seeing how that might transition over to his NHL cards, even if they're just, quote unquote standard cards, meaning no memorabilia or autograph or even serial numbered. The Young Gun base cards are not serial numbered, and there's thousands upon thousands of them out there, but they're as in demand as any card that there is, really. So yeah, I think the value conversation is definitely going to be debated over the next few months until it happens. But yeah, I think it's definitely justified to see those huge numbers being talked about. This is not just any other first overall pick. Like Aaron said, he's not a Crosby or McDavid, but he's not a Nico Hischier. Like, he is a very special player that has rightfully been hyped up for years now and will step into the league right away and probably be a fairly impactful player. Just, he has that size, he has that speed, he has that skill, he has that hockey IQ that will allow him to transition right into the NHL and be a productive player. So you've seen players like Jack Hughes selling well because of that potential that they have to be a standout player. But I think for Lafreniere, it's just really apparent that he will be a standout player. Like, I don't think there's any question in anybody's mind, about his career moving forward. I don't think anyone's out there thinking, oh yeah, like he'll probably, be a third liner, like he'll be a serviceable NHL player, but he's nothing special. Like,
No, he's going to be next level. No,
yeah.
I mean, there hasn't been any of that rumbling going on. It's just, he's going to be a good solid player. I've heard, a good 60-point NHL season, things like that. So, I mean, especially on the team he's going on, like I could definitely see him surpassing that. So yeah, he's definitely not your run of the mill first round draft pick like we may have seen in the past of late. He's definitely going to be a special player, and definitely maybe not in a league of his own, but definitely in good company when it comes to comparable players.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would be surprised if he didn't hit 60 points as a rookie. I think that's very achievable for him.
For sure.
Moving forward, I mean, who knows what the limit really is for him, but I think it's probably a pretty safe assumption to think that he can become at least a point a game player after a couple years. The skill is unquestionably there. There's a reason why he's been the, unquestioned first overall pick of this draft for a while. I mean, yeah, Quentin Byfield has kind of snuck into that conversation at times, but really, I mean, it's been the Lafreniere draft. There hasn't been that debate over, even this season, but over the last year or two of, well, like, yeah, he might go first, or yeah, odds are decent he'll go first. No, like, it's Lafreniere's going first. Like, he's that good. He deserves to go first overall, and he will, and he should. So, it's important to keep in mind that that's the quality of player we're talking about, and that is obviously going to factor into the value that this card commands as well. And talking about players and values, another thing to note with Upper Deck Series 1 is that part of those negotiations to get the Lafreniere rights for Series 1 also included pretty much every prospect or quote unquote rookie that is currently or was in the postseason bubble with their teams. All of those players will be eligible to receive rookie cards, even if they have not played or do not play. I guess I shouldn't say every. There are a couple of exceptions based on some technicalities, but generally speaking, almost every rookie that's in the bubble is going to be eligible to receive cards. So obviously, probably the biggest name that would refer to would be Nick Robertson on the Toronto Maple Leafs. So he'll be in Series 1, I'm sure, and that'll be another very desirable card, I would think. But there are a number of guys that have made their debuts, and other guys that are just in the bubble with their teams. Even if they don't debut, they're pretty highly touted prospects that very well might be put into Series 1 just because it's a pretty safe bet that they will either play next year or at the very least go on to have a pretty successful career. A name that immediately comes to mind for me would be someone like a Bowen Byram on the Colorado Avalanche, who is with the Avalanche in the bubble. I don't believe he's played yet, but I think it's probably a safe bet to say that he'll be playing for the Avalanche next season. So, in terms of guys that are in the bubble that haven't made their debut yet, he would kind of be one that I would expect that would probably be involved in Upper Deck Series 1, whether he's debuted by then or not. But yeah, by Upper Deck getting permission to use those guys that are in the bubble, that definitely answers a lot of questions in terms of what Upper Deck 1 is going to look like. Before that and before the NHL returned to play, there were definitely very valid question marks about how is Upper Deck 1 even going to happen. I mean, sure, you have the carryover rookies that debuted late in this season that are going to have their rookie cards, obviously, like always, but that wasn't enough. If I'm remembering correctly, there were somewhere around 35 or maybe 40 guys, under normal conditions be considered carryover rookies. Well, obviously every year, for quite a while at this point, there's been 50 Young Guns in both Series 1 and Series 2. So if you only have 35 or 40 carryover rookies that you can use, what do you do for the other 10 to 15 cards, right? So, Upper Deck was able to get that worked out. And yeah, I mean, even if some of those guys haven't made their debut, I think there will definitely be some desirable cards there for sure, just with guys that, have that pedigree of probably being pretty successful NHL players down the road. Aaron, what are your thoughts about that announcement of the bubble players being available for use as well?
I think it's good. Those bubble players who I guess are on the bubble with their respective teams, it's good that they get to be included as well. Like, I'm sure there's some, like, I haven't really looked over the list too much, but I just shared it on Twitter earlier. But I'm sure there's some names there that who, again, are right there with their teams and are probably going to be making their debut fairly soon. And so either they're going to be maybe snuck into Series 1. I'm sure they can find some good photos of these guys with exhibition games and whatnot to create a very acceptable young gun. Or they can just leave them until Series 2, until they make their actual debut and kind of pump up Series 2 a little bit more. But yeah, I think they're going to be fine. My big thing was because I guess Upper Deck went into a mini panic mode when they didn't know if they were going to get Lafreniere or any of those bubble players to use. If they were kind of throwing around some set ideas to kind of pump up the product anyway, because I don't think they would cancel the product. But I think I'm just wondering if we see a little bit extra, as far as memorabilia content for maybe older players or players we don't see a lot, or some continuation of sets like the Piece of History sets that we might have seen some updates normally, but maybe this year we might see a little bit more than usual just because they had tried to maybe plan stuff early and then, they decided, hey, we don't need it, but we've already planned for it, so let's just put it in anyway. Could we see Upper Deck Series 1 have a little bit more in it that way? When it comes to the memorabilia content? I'm not really sure, but who knows? I mean, I definitely think that it's going to make for an interesting Series 1, but with these recent announcements with Lafreniere and with the bubble players being used in the product, I don't think we'll notice that much of a difference at all. I mean, as long as Lafreniere's in there, the product's going to sell. So I'm hoping they give us a couple like nice little chase cards, aside from the rookies. But yeah, we're going to have to see what happens. I'm hoping they bring a little bit more to the table in that respect, but we'll have to see how it shakes up.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing super specific, but I was talking to Billy earlier this week, and he said that he's got a few things up his sleeve for
Yeah,
Series
like
1.
stuff
So
like that. Exactly.
we'll see. He didn't give me any specifics, obviously, but
No.
yeah, I mean, there'll definitely be some interesting stuff in there. And I just pulled up that list of the bubble rookies that will be eligible for 2021 Upper Deck products. Some of the names that stand out, you've got Philip Broberg for the Edmonton Oilers, who's quickly kind of been establishing himself as one of their best prospects. Bowen Byram, like I mentioned. One that's kind of interesting to me is Reed Duke of the Vegas Golden Knights, who probably, even though he might not have a great NHL career, people are going to know him forever as the first ever Vegas Golden Knight. So
Yeah, that was big news.
for him to actually get cards, if he does, I think would be super
I
cool.
think that would be awesome. I think they're going to find a way to hopefully squeeze them in at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got Vitaly Kravtsov with the Rangers, so that'll give you a really sweet 1-2 punch for the Rangers. That'll be great for group breaks, I'm sure. You've got Peyton Krebs again with Vegas. You've got Ryan McLeod of the Oilers, Connor McMichael of the Washington Capitals, Jake Ottinger for the Dallas Stars, who's an up-and-coming goalie, Nick Robertson, like I said. Yes, I mean, there's definitely some very interesting names on that list. It looks like there are 41 eligible players there, many of which have, been first-round picks in the past, as well as just some other interesting names. I mean, I mentioned Reed Duke, but another one that's going to be interesting to see, I hope he gets cards just because it seems like he's quickly become a fan favorite and has a really good story, is Alex Belzile of the Montreal Canadiens, a journeyman player who finally made it and finally made his NHL debut within the bubble. I can see there being a huge demand for his cards, even though he's really just a bottom six heart and soul kind of guy. I can see there being huge demand for his cards, especially from Canadiens fans. So yeah, it'll be interesting. Obviously, just because they've gotten permission to use these 41 players does not mean that they're all going to show up in Series 1. Unless something wild happens, I'm assuming that there's probably going to be 50 Young Guns. So probably they're going to favor more toward using a lot of those carryover rookies from this season and putting those guys into 2021 Series 1, and just kind of complementing that group with these bubble players. So I wouldn't expect to see all of these guys. I mean, there are definitely guys on this list that won't make their debut in the bubble and might not even play at all next season. Even just looking at guys on my favorite team, the Chicago Blackhawks, there are, I believe, 4 players on this list of 41, and none of them have played an NHL game, and none of them probably will play, in the bubble. And it's possible that none of the 4 of them even play at all next season. So I would not expect to see cards of those guys, for example, those guys that were kind of, oh, let's get this guy in the bubble just so that he gets that playoff atmosphere environment and gets to bond with the team, and is able to be on the ice practicing and stuff.
I think it was just like an emergency. Like, if the whole entire team gets COVID, we need bodies.
Exactly.
So I think it was just purely just emergencies. That's why these guys are there. Smart move by the team, but as far as Young Guns go, yeah, I don't think a lot of them will get any. It's nice for Upper Deck having the carryovers plus these guys to pick and choose if they need to, have a couple other players to fill in a product. But yeah, I don't think all those guys will get Young Guns. It just wouldn't be practical at this point.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, I mean, just logistically speaking, I mean, there's even some guys on this list that haven't even professionally worn a jersey before. I look at a guy like Alec Regula for the Blackhawks. He was drafted by the Detroit Red Wings, and the Blackhawks just acquired him earlier this season. So, professionally speaking, he's never put on a Blackhawks game jersey before. So, like, Upper Deck doesn't have any photos, of Alec Regula wearing Blackhawks stuff. So, guys like that, they're not going to be included, even though they're theoretically available to be used. It's just not going to happen. But it's definitely exciting that Upper Deck was able to get permission to use these guys. There are a lot of really interesting guys on the list, like we said, that even if they maybe haven't made their debut by the time Series 1 releases, it's just going to be cool to get their cards because, whether they're collectible now or people have high hopes for them, it's just going to be fun to see cards of them and know that people can get going collecting their stuff pretty much right from the get-go. So, yeah, I think it's encouraging to see the progress that has been made in terms of making sure that Series 1 can happen and can happen, quote unquote, as normally as it can. Obviously, it's not going to be exactly the same. And, the full year of 2021 products is going to be a little bit different. I'm sure as the season really gets going, it'll kind of get back more to normal. But the earlier stuff is going to be interesting. It's not going to be the same, and hopefully people understand that. Obviously, people hold Upper Deck to very high standards, as they should, but at some point you got to understand what they're working with here too. They can only do so much, and they don't have any control over this really. So you got to, kind of take it easy on the criticism at some point and understand that they're just doing the best that they can with the hand that they've been dealt. So yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see how Series 1 unfolds. I'm definitely excited to see how it goes, even just, in terms of the players involved, but also the content itself. I know there's going to be the French parallels this year, which haven't been done in a long time, but they're coming back this year.
I
And
really like the return of those parallels. Like, those are really nice when they were done, and I'm glad to see it come back. I wonder if they did that just because Lafreniere was projected to go number 1. I wonder if that had anything to do with it, and the potential, of him being drafted by Montreal Canadiens. Obviously it didn't turn out that way, but that would have been pretty sweet. But a French parallel, regardless of Lafreniere, is going to do very well.
yeah, absolutely.
And it's a tough pull too.
Yeah, I was just talking with Billy about that. Those are, for the Young Guns, the French Young Guns are 1 in 120 packs. So
Yeah, that's tough.
if you do the math, breaking down 50 Young Guns over that ratio, a Lafreniere Young Gun French parallel is pretty much like 1 in 20 cases.
Yeah, that's going to be,
So
that's like seeing the first sales of those ones. Like, we're talking about prices, like seeing the first couple sales of those cards are going to be just totally off the chain.
yeah,
Like, oh man.
yeah, and it'll be interesting, like you said, with a player, a French Canadian like Lafreniere. I could very well see his French Young Gun doing better than some of the other
Oh,
parallels.
for sure. For sure. I'm not sure if they're numbered or not. I don't think so.
No, they're
But
not.
but yeah, like, they're gonna sell very well and definitely gonna outsell some of his other Young Gun parallels, like maybe the exclusive, like maybe a clear cut. Yeah, who knows? But yeah, it's gonna sell very well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, yeah, like we said, they are not serial numbered, but just because of him being a French Canadian player, I could very well see that driving up the value of that specific card like wild. If you look at other Young Guns, no, their value probably isn't going to be the same as, an exclusives Young Gun, for example, just because the scarcity, even though they are really hard to pull, they're not that limited. So, your normal American player or European player, their French parallel isn't going to be nearly as desirable as someone like Lafreniere. But I almost think that seeing the value comparison of the normal Young Gun and the French Young Gun and the other parallels, just seeing how those all kind of compare is going to be really intriguing too.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome. All right, so just some questions to just kind of wrap up episode 11 here. We just want to know, like, just what will the Alexis Lafreniere Young Guns sell for at release? Like, we want to hear opinions on this. We've heard a couple already, but just if you have an idea of where you see this card going at release, definitely let us know, and we definitely want to hear your thoughts on that. And as far as the Young Gun itself, the card itself, what would you prefer to see on the Lafreniere Young Gun? Do you want it an on-ice photo shoot style, or do you want it kind of like a unique off-ice style photo? Or if you have any ideas of what any of those would look like, definitely let us know. But just any ideas would be really cool to think about. So definitely, if you have any ideas, just send us a tweet or send us a message or something. That'd be great. We'll just post all these questions on social media, and so definitely keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, shout out to Billy and the rest of the Upper Deck team. Here's some free market research for you. So
Pretty much, yeah, exactly. Like I could see a couple of people from Upper Deck scrolling those tweets and definitely seeing if there's some good ideas to pick from the pot. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hear your ideas.
yeah, let us know. Like, give us those specific image ideas that you want to see. I mentioned, let's see Lafreniere standing by the Statue of Liberty. If you have something else, maybe you want to see him in Times Square, or you want to see something involving MSG. Whatever it might be. Let us know. Let us know what specific images you would want to see, even if they don't end up being used. I just like hearing that stuff. It's just cool to think about, oh, what could be or what could have been or things like that. So definitely let us know. I mean, I know we tell you guys to interact with us and answer our questions all the time. And some of you are great about it, but we definitely want to hear from you guys, like you listening right now. Once this is over in whatever 1 or 2 minutes, go on Twitter and reply to our tweet, or send us a DM on Instagram, or comment on Facebook, or email us, or comment on YouTube, whatever, wherever you are listening right now. Once this is done in a minute or two, interact with us. Like, tell us what you want to see. You never know who's looking at it, and you might have an awesome idea that Upper Deck hasn't thought about, or we haven't thought about, or no one else has thought about, but is a really sweet idea, and it could happen. Social media is a lot more powerful than people might realize sometimes. Upper Deck does look at stuff, like they really do. I know Billy has said that on our show before, but like Upper Deck truly does read almost everything that people are saying online about them. Like, they see it and they take it to
The
heart.
good and the bad.
Yeah, like they want to know what collectors want. So seriously, interact with us, give us your ideas. Even if it doesn't happen, we enjoy seeing it, and odds are decent that someone at Upper Deck probably saw it and it's probably like, oh yeah, like that is an interesting idea. I'm glad someone said that because we hadn't thought about that. So yeah, like just take whatever 15 or 20 seconds out of your day, give us your ideas, and who knows, maybe you end up coming up with the idea that creates an iconic hockey card. So you never know. But yeah, that'll pretty much wrap it up for episode 11. So please be sure to follow us on social media while you're giving us those awesome ideas for the Lafreniere Young Gun. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Center Ice Cardcast, and on Twitter at Center Ice CC. Please also be sure to subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice to make sure you never miss a future episode. Until next time on Center Ice Cardcast, keep collecting those hockey cards.